Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in and listening to the African Cultural Association Presents. The African Cultural Association of Greater Lowell is a 501c3 organization. It's a non-profit organization that has its goal is to promote what makes Africa great and the cultures that we all have as Africans in the Merrimack Valley area of northern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. And with us this afternoon is the Professor PLO Lumumba from Kenya. And Prof, welcome to.
Thank you very much, Ben.
It is our pleasure to have you. And we had the event last Saturday, and it was a great event. And thank you very much for the powerful speech that you treated us to. We know your work in the continent. It's been across the continent, and people really admire you. And because of that, we had to invite you here to receive the first of its kind, the African Continental Luminary Award. And we really appreciate you honoring that invitation. Now, you have devoted your life and career to fighting corruption and bad governance and creating awareness of all of the continent of Africa on what really plagues our continent. Could you tell us a little bit more of that, of your work over the years, starting from your law school days through your career in Nairobi?
Thank you very much, Ben. First of all, let me say how glad I am to have been invited to the United States of America to receive the award. It is great because it is a testament to the fact that what one does is appreciated by others. That is a confirmation that there is some contribution and some impact that we are making. And the reason why I consider the fight against corruption and bad governance critical in Africa is because the continent continues to underperform in critical areas because of poor leadership. You will remember when the first African country gained independence in 1957, and that was Ghana, and Kwame Nkrumah. The expectations were great. And I remember very vividly the words which have been immortalized as having been spoken by Kwame Nkrumah, that the freedom of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. A few years later, in 1963, when the OAU is founded in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, 32 countries were represented. And that, in my view, was a testament to the conviction of the likes of Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere, Jomo Kenyatta, not to forget that there were other Africans in the diaspora, people like Marcus Garvey, W.B. Du Bois, and many others who contributed to this process. And the reason why personally I've considered this something in the nature of a crusade is because I see many young Africans running away to Europe, particularly, and to the United States of America when they have no qualifications. And they are doing so because successive generations of political leaders have failed to create opportunities for them. And therefore, even as a young student, I took this as something that ought to receive attention. I started working with the Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Foundation in Tanzania when I was a student. I worked with John Garang Dimabior of South Sudan when I was a student. And I think I've continued on this trajectory because no fundamental changes have been made in the last few years. That is not to say that a number of African countries have not made steps that are worthy of commendation. They are. We have seen quite a number of countries doing well. We have seen countries such as Botswana doing well. We have seen in the recent past Ethiopia, Rwanda, Namibia, and even Kenya at a certain stage, even Nigeria, we have seen since the entry into power of President Buhari, quite a number of things are beginning to happen. But these are few and far between. One holds the view that a continent which has a population of 1.2 billion conservatively, and which has resources of every kind, should be performing better. It is noteworthy that the combined GDP of all the 55 African countries combined is smaller than the economy of Germany. And that is a travesty. So this is a crusade. And it gladdens my heart that those of you who are here in the United States and have retained linkages with Africa consider this to be something that is worthy of recognition.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, the crusade you have started, you call it a crusade, and I think it's a right choice of word you have started. And you started it by creating the awareness. Could you tell us what program you have across board to create this awareness? You made mention of something a few days ago that now people are able to link the effect, connect the effect of corruption to their daily lives or to the tribulations or hardships that they have in their daily lives. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Perhaps to preface my answer, you will want to note that in the early years of independence, when one looks very keenly, the people that I call the first generation leaders, to their credit, they had no experience in governance.
Yes.
They had simply, some of them were clerks, a number of them had graduated from the United States of America, from France, from Portugal, depending on who the colonizer were.
Right.
And very suddenly, they are thrust with these responsibilities and with an expectant population. And within a very short time, they are expected to deliver. And it's also to be remembered that the erstwhile colonizers did not stop there. They still wanted to influence processes. But to their credit, in the early years, the developments in infrastructure were monumental in most of the countries. The development in the health sector, in the education sector, and the personal commitment of some of these individuals who stayed in power for a very long time. It is noteworthy, for example, that somebody like Zambia's Kenneth Kaunda, after being in power for nearly 24 years, upon leaving office, had the equivalent of $8,000 only in his account. Tanzania's Kambarage Nyerere had only one house in the capital, Dar es Salaam, and another very modest house in his rural home in Butiama. So when one sees the trend that then took over after this myriad of military coups and the emergence of people that I call monster leaders who are stealing from their countries, the Mobutus of this world, the Jean-Bertrand Bocassas of this world, the Sani Abachas of this world, who are stealing money and keeping it in Switzerland and little islands such as the Cayman Islands. And when they were doing that, the roads were dilapidated, the gains that had been made in the education sector were being lost. We were losing people, the gains that had been made in the health sector, the gains that had been made in the areas of infant mortality, maternal mortality were being lost. And therefore, as somebody who was able to appreciate that this kind of grand theft, what a friend of mine from Liberia, Boima Fanbule, calls theft on an industrial scale.
Absolutely.
The impact of it was such as to make people realize that corruption was indeed one of the major contributing factors. For a long time, many people had to say that corruption is a victimless crime. But people now are able to make a linkage.
Yes.
It's because the Minister for Health has kept money in Switzerland, that you don't have medicine in hospitals, or even if you have something that looks like medicine, it's placebos. Or you don't have chalk or school textbooks. It's because the Minister for Education during that period has kept money outside. You don't have water or whatever amenities that one needs. This linkage is what has now created resentment. And one sees, therefore, that this resentment is given international recognition in the year 2003 with the UN Convention Against Corruption and the African Convention for Preventing and Combating Corruption, which are then cascaded to national legislation and, of course, protocols within the regions of SADC or ECOWAS or East African Community or the Sahelian region or the Maghreb region. And while it is true that these institutions are being created by the political class, the reality is that the political will is absent. So it is window dressing in many cases. So you'll see your police officer on the beat is arrested for receiving a bribe. In the intervening period, your minister for petroleum, who is stealing in the billions, is seeking the office of a governor or the office of the president. And therefore, many of us, or perhaps not many of us, but a number of us from different countries started getting involved. Some, of course, fell by the wayside through threats and intimidation. By God's grace, I continue to be active in Africa. Why should we remain active? We are active because we believe that if the people are sensitized, if the people are able to appreciate that their plight is a direct result of the theft that is being undertaken by the political leaders, then they'll call the leaders to account. So sensitization is very critical. Somehow, because of these travels that I engaged in, particularly in the last 3 years, going to different countries and courtesy of social media and the YouTube, this message has reverberated in different parts of Africa and gained root. With the consequence now that I meet many young men and women, and even old men and old women, who are beginning to say that this message must spread. And it must spread because if it does not, then Africa is not going to occupy its pride of place amongst the Community of Nations. And it's instructive that this year, 2018, has been designated by the African Union as the year of the fight against corruption as a condition precedent to transforming the continent. Only, I think the conference only ended yesterday, the 30th summit of the African heads of states and government in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And they are saying, let us fight corruption, because it is only when we fight corruption and fight it effectively that the Agenda 2063, which is the agenda that is designed to transform Africa economically, politically, and socially, will be realized, and that Africa will then realize our potential and sit at the dinner table, as I say, ad nauseum. Yeah. So that is, yeah, as diners, not as waiters. So this is critical, you know, and young people, Africa speaks of herself in the past tense, that we used to be great. We were the builders of the pyramids. We were the builders of the Monomotapa Empire. That the Dogon in Senegal were astronomers before the Europeans left the caves. That they were organized governmental systems among the Ashanti in West Africa and among the Baganda in Uganda. But that is historical romanticism. I'm saying that that could very well have been true. But what are we doing now? What are we doing now? Are we able to support ourselves? Are we able to resist some of the people who, in the name of trading with us, are actually reaping us? And in this regard, we must be very wary of the Chinese, whose work ethic I admire. But we can only engage on an equal footing if we are able to harness our resources and add value so that there is genuine trade. Otherwise, there is no trade. What there is raid. And I think that that is critical going forward, particularly to create employment opportunities for young men and women. Right now, you know for a fact, for example, in countries such as Zimbabwe, there is 80% unemployment.
Yes, indeed.
If you are talking about 80% unemployment and you have young men and women out of Zimbabwe, nearly 5 million, you have nearly half of your population out because they can't get opportunities. In Kenya, the most recent statistics say that the unemployment rate is about 39%, Tanzania about 24%, in the Democratic Republic of Congo possibly in the neighborhood of 70 to 80%. And my view, therefore, is that if we were to energize the fight against corruption, if we were to succeed in roping the political class, if we were able to recruit the populace, if we were able to energize those from the African continent who are in the diaspora, then this battle can be won. And permit me just to say something little about the diaspora.
Yes.
Many African countries have now recognized that there are men and women in the diaspora, because these are men and women who tend to be very highly trained in all the professions.
Yes,
and they are repatriating their hard-earned income to sustain their families in Africa. And in countries such as Kenya, we now can comfortably say that perhaps the third or fourth largest source of national income is remittances from the diaspora. And I think that could be true of Ghana, that could be true of Nigeria, that could be true of Ethiopia, the Gambia, and many countries. So the diaspora has a voice.
Absolutely.
They can be listened to. Many ministries of foreign affairs are now creating desks for the diaspora because they know these are men and women with the power of the purse.
Absolutely.
And if they insist that certain things ought to be done in a proper way, then they will be heard. And that is why it gladdens my heart that you who are here in the United States of America, in the state of Massachusetts, are so much organized that you are beginning to participate and to inform the agenda in Mother Africa.
We recognize that, and we thank you for that. And also urge you to continue in that process, because we notice that some of those countries don't even have entrenched in their constitution where diasporans can vote, because a part of them there is a fright too that some of us in diaspora are coming in either to enlighten the people some more or to ruffle the waters so much for the corrupt leadership, and their tendency will be to resist us. But so you find out that most diasporans who would like to participate in the political arena over there, even if but just by remaining where they are to be able to vote, to influence the election back home, are deprived of doing that. But it's an ongoing thing, we recognize.
But you see, Ben, my own view is Africa must be very innovative in terms of dealing with the diaspora in the endeavor to improve their participation in civic activities and to contribute to the national economies. And we can learn from countries such as Philippines. You know, the Philippines has specific ministry or department of government that deals with their workers outside of the Philippines, because they recognize that this is an important constituency. One could even go further, that in the future, it may very well be that individuals within the diaspora without physical movement to their mother countries could be members of parliament wherever they are. There is no reason why, for example, in Nigeria, you can't have somebody in the House of Representatives, but he or she is resident in the United States and can participate in deliberations in the House via technology.
Absolutely.
So there are many opportunities that are available and we must exploit. And to go back to the question of corruption and bad governance, it is very important, particularly at this stage in the history of Africa, to realize that if we don't deal with the young African population, Africa is a very young continent. As young, I can say comfortably that 70% of the African population is below age 35. If you don't, that is significant. If you don't take care of this population, then you are in danger. There are two things that can happen. You either reap what is referred to as the youth dividend, that you have a young, energetic population, and that therefore it can contribute to your economy. Or you create an environment where they become disillusioned and they become a threat to security. That choice must be made. Is it being made? Yes. In a number of countries, deliberate efforts are being made. Ethiopia, in my view, has demonstrated two things. First, there is a sense in which, of course, problems of governance are there. But in the recent past, one has seen that Ethiopia has been able to generate nearly 10,000 megawatts of electricity. And believe me, it was almost 100% financed by the Ethiopian government with assistance from Ethiopians in the diaspora.
Wow, that's significant.
And right now, they are building industrial parks which are being financed by the Chinese, but on a very good model, that there must be technology transfer. That is a model that can't be replicated. I know in Kenya, for example, we are talking about solar power. In Namibia, they say, actually, when you get into the airport in Namibia, they say that 1/3 of the solar power in Namibia can generate power for the entire Western Europe. That is the potential that they have. And you can see that in Botswana. All these things can only happen if there is good governance. If we have men and women who occupy public office because they want to serve, what does it require? That the guns must be silent. And I'm happy that one of the primary pillars, the 7 pillars, one of the 7 pillars of Africa Agenda 2063 is that the guns must be silent by the year 2020.
I hope we hit it.
is only 2 years away. But where are the guns sounding? The guns are sounding in South Sudan. The guns are sounding in Somalia. The guns are mutedly sounding in Eritrea. The guns are sounding in the Cameroons. The guns are sounding in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Central African Republic. Why is it critical that we must silence the guns? We must silence the guns so that we are able to harness our resources, so that there is movement of labor from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to Dhaka in Senegal, from Cape Town in South Africa to Tunis in Tunisia. And I'm saying that there is a linkage between corruption and bad governance. If you have bad leaders, invariably they'll want to steal from the national coffers. If you have bad leaders, then they will want to mobilize their people to vote on the basis of ethnic extraction.
Yes.
So that there is, the democratic space is not a space where there is a competition of ideas, but is a competition of ethnic loyalty and ethnic alliances. The natural child of such an intercourse is chaos.
So
And absolutely. So in my view, it is very critical that your voices are heard, that the voices must be heard from outside of the United States of America, from outside of Africa, from the United States of America, from Europe and other places where Africans are. And if they are heard and heard eloquently and consistently, then the people, the population will be energized in a positive manner. And I think that is where your organization comes in, and other organizations of a similar, with a similar mandate and are willing to work for the benefit of the mother country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you for that, because that's part of what we've been encouraging folks. For the most part, we had a symposium not too long ago where it was captioned participation. We ought to participate in our common enterprise. We ought to participate in our local government elections and state elections, both here and back home. Part of why it's important for us to participate here in the diaspora is so that we will learn the trade and the skills of what they are doing here, so we'll be able to transfer those back home to help our motherland. So it is just participation across board that I think that will help us in this crusade that you have very well started.
And Ben, it is very critical. Yesterday, which was I think the 29th of January, I had the privilege and honor of meeting very high-powered group from the Cameroons.
Yes.
And you know what is happening in the Cameroons now. The Cameroons are in trouble in terms of the conflict which they described as the Anglophone-Francophone conflict. And there is the agitation for secession. And it's not the only country that is talking secession. We know, for example, that in Nigeria, there is the talk of renewing the secessionist movement amongst the Biafra. But I've always held the view that the problems we are talking about, absolutely, and I hold the view that the problems that we are talking about as justifying secession can actually be resolved within the existing nation. Because if you look, the African boundaries are all artificial. These were things that were imposed upon the nation in an arbitrary manner in 1884 in Berlin by the European powers. But a conscious decision was made in 1963, 1964 that these boundaries would be inviolable. And the argument was solid. They said, if we start redrawing these boundaries, then there will be conflict upon conflict, and we will never resolve. So let us make the best of them, and let us create an environment where the artificiality of these borders is rendered useless by allowing free movement of goods and labor, so that we have integration. I think the person who was much more enthusiastic in those early days was Kwame Nkrumah. He was clear in his mind, let us unite now. Let us have one currency now. Let us have one army now. Let us have one policing force now. He didn't win the argument on that day. The ones who won the day were the ones says, let us be gradual about it. Let us grow through regions, and then let these regions be the building blocks upon which we'll ultimately end up with United States of Africa. That has not happened, but that must begin to happen. And I'm very happy that during the just concluded session, one of the things that they have succeeded in doing is putting pen to paper on the question of the open skies in Africa, so that flights can now move from one country to the other is gone. And I know for a fact that within the regions there is an attempt to create single currency in the East African community by the year 2025. Within SADC, movements are happening in ECOWAS. I think positive things are happening in Central Africa. Not much activity in the former French colony, the CFA franc, which is too much linked to the Paris government. But these movements, in my view, are positive. And why do I think that this crusade about good governance, this crusade again about governments that are accountable to the people is one major plank, is because if you look at the history of the struggle for independence for Africa, it was not the preserve of people who are resident in Africa. It was a combined effort of people who were in the diaspora. Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican, but he said we've got to go back to motherland. W.B. Du Bois was a citizen of the United States of America, but he said we've got to pay attention to what is happening in Africa. I remember Martin Luther King Jr., even as he talked about the civil rights movement in 1963, and Ralph Abernathy and Andrew Young and many of these individuals who were very active at that time, they were so connected to the continent in Africa that when Ghana attained independence, they were present in Accra, Ghana, as a clear demonstration that we are with you.
Absolutely.
And I think,
years ago,
yes,
there's some evidence that he even attended Nigeria's independence.
Yes,
Quietly,
yes. So these are the kind of things that we want to revive, because, you know, there is something that I think it is Ronald Reagan who, when he was the president, said it, and it annoyed quite a number of people, but I liked it. He said, America does what is in America's best interest. I hear President Trump is saying the same thing, and I have no quarrel with it. Every country must do that which is in its best interest.
Absolutely.
And once you do that, then you will be respected.
Yes, indeed.
Once you do that, then you can engage.
Yes.
China is now receiving the visibility that it deserves because they have done things.
Yes.
It is present in everybody's mind and heart, whether you like it or not.
Yes.
We are being forced now to learn Chinese,
Yes.
and because it is the factory of the world. What should Africa emulate from China? What should Africa learn from India? What should Africa learn from Vietnam?
Yes.
What should Africa learn from the United States of America?
Korea.
South Korea. And the reason why this kind of history and this kind of evidence is useful, if it took the United States of America 200 years to attain certain things, it should now take us 50 years.
Yes.
Because we now know where the landmines are.
Yes, we now
And,
know
and,
where the landmines
yeah,
are.
and we can avoid them.
Yes.
And this is the kind of conversation that I would want to hear. I would want to ensure that we engage the leadership. I'm very happy now that President Paul Kagame of Rwanda has become the chair of the African Union for the next 1 year. And in the process of reforming the African Union, I hope that he will be focused to ensure that we deal with things that inform the Agenda 2063 and to look at a number of things. One, that we introduce what I call hygiene in the conduct of our politics. And hygiene means that we create an environment where good men and women compete on the basis of ideas, and that when they go to the ballot box, they give the people the opportunity to elect them on that basis, not on the basis of ethnic extraction. Absolutely. And once we've dealt with the issue of hygiene in our politics, where there is good politics, then you can inform the economy. Then you can inform the economy in a manner that is going to address other social problems. Once you do that, then you arrest this mass migration of labor and losing labor through what is essentially brain drain. You have highly trained individuals who have nothing to do because the politicians are running roughshod over their countries, and they go to other lands to offer those skills. It can be done. My joy as I walk across Africa is that one begins to see a groundswell of enthusiasm. One begins to see the emergence of a new cadre of leaders who are beginning to appreciate that this is a matter that must be dealt with urgently. And therefore, as I look at Africa now, for example, South Africa, which is a major anchor down there, the beginning of the emergence of somebody like Cyril Ramaphosa. I'm not saying that an individual can solve this, but as the captain of that team, would re-energize the South African economy in a positive way. And in that region, one sees people in Namibia and Botswana. That is a major anchor, because there must be regional anchors.
Absolutely.
When one comes to East Africa, one can see that Kenya remains a critical country, but one can see the initiatives of Tanzania's President Magufuli. And one sees another anchor on the eastern coast. And also Ethiopia is also another anchor. When one moves to West Africa, one wants to see a resurgent Nigeria. Because Nigeria, you are easily talking about a population of anything above 200 million.
Easily.
If you are talking about 200 million, and in Ghana, I see President Akufo-Addo is also beginning to do things that are useful. Then we come to the center. One hopes that the problem of the Democratic Republic of Congo will be resolved this year, so that they have credible elections, you silence the guns. Congo is larger than Western Europe combined. And as I think it is David Livingstone or Stanley, one of the explorers, who said that the resources that Congo has is scandalous. That there must have been a conspiracy of the divine beings, that all the resources must be contained in the Congo. So if you do that, then that is the anchor in the Central Africa. You go to the Maghreb, you silence the guns in Libya, then you have two anchors there. You have Egypt, and you have Algeria, and you could even go to Morocco. Then you have a stable continent. And once you have a stable continent with a population of 1.5 million, easily the continent of Africa would combined, we must also remember that Africa is not homogeneous. We are talking about 55 countries. Yes. But combined GDP would move into the neighborhood of the GDP of the United States of America in 20 years, so that we have a $10 trillion economy. Then we will be invited to Davos, not for photo opportunity, but as true participant. For the moment, we are just invited for photo opportunities, and we are humored that we are part of the assembly, but we are not. Then we will be at the dinner table as diners, choosing caviar, not the remains which are thrown at us.
Now, you had a lovely story today. One young lady asked you, now, you've been having this crusade for a while.
Yes.
Are you seeing any effect? And I was very impressed at the story you told us about the I think it was one of West African countries that their citizens are migrating to the Mediterranean.
Yes.
They will make contributions, and then now, part of the contributions, they're now beginning to use themselves to... Could you tell us more about that?
I thought that was, sometimes when you do these things, when you say things, you think that they end where you said them. But there is a sense in which, if you are a believer in the Word of God as a Christian, it gives greater meaning to this saying that in the beginning there was the Word. So and the Word was with God. Yes. So from that perspective, I think the Word is very powerful. And I went to Monrovia last year, and I met a group of young men. They were all men. And they told me, we had listened to your speech about the state of Africa, and we were minded of traveling to Europe, like every young West African who is in desperation desires. But when we said, we heard you speak, we said, we are not going anywhere. So these young men have established a cyber cafe and a major establishment, and they are now employers. And I'm sure there are such stories that can be told in different parts of Africa, not because of my speeches only, but other individuals who are also engaged in similar activities. And so there is a sense in which we must, in the nature of things, combine our efforts. I was reading something that I found very instructive from the story of Buddha. and Buddha said that we must ensure that in our activities we are not like oil and water which repel each other, but we must be like milk and water which combine and gel together. So my own view is that if we combined our efforts, all these institutions and individuals of goodwill, and we carry this crusade in a structured manner. And this is one of the things that I want to do this year. I want to go to countries and identify groups of individuals and request to meet heads of state. This is my crusade, that in the next 3 years, I will have met every head of state or government in Africa with a view to say, Your Excellency, or Your Honor, what I want is for you to give us an opportunity to crusade, to create opportunities. Nyerere used to say it very well, that Africa is very modest in the thing that she wants. The United States can send men to the moon, but Africa wants to just ensure that there is water in the other village. And I think that is how modestly we must start, that we are able to ensure that whether it is in Bambane in Swaziland, or Windhoek in Namibia, or Gaborone in Botswana, or Niamey in Niger, or Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, that we have young men and women who are engaged in economic activity. That like China, in the next 25 years, we are able to pull nearly 700 million people into the middle class. That we have individuals. It can be done. So that you have people who are taking out mortgages. You have people who have loans for cars, because when people take out mortgages and they are responsible, then they can't engage in criminality. They can't engage in violence when they want to take their children to good schools. And I think that that is achievable. China, during my own lifetime and during your own lifetime, has succeeded in pulling up nearly 700 million men and women from poverty into the middle class. And you can see, I mean, in the area of tourism now, if your country does not have Chinese visitors, you are not doing well. And I think that Africa is capable of achieving that. Africa is capable of being the factory of the world.
Absolutely.
To take over from China. And that will only be done if there is deliberate effort, and all these efforts, in the nature of things, the shortest route to dramatic change in any country is through enlightened leadership. It has been demonstrated throughout the years. I think the United States of America has demonstrated that during the critical periods, whether it was during the Civil War, the Great Depression, or at whatever time. It is the leadership from the top that cascaded these good ideas down. In Brazil, we know that Brazil, until 1975, it used to be said of Brazil and Latin America generally that coup d'etats were as frequent as breakfast.
Absolutely.
But we saw Brazil, within our lifetime, has now produced jets. We saw Chile, after the activities of Augusto Pinochet, that within 20 years, it is now a middle-level economy. We saw Argentina, after the post-Peron movement. Argentina is now a middle-level economy. Uruguay, and many other countries that one can. Vietnam, post the war. Vietnam now, incidentally, just this is a little eclectic in the manner in which I'm referring to these countries, but I hope I make my point. Vietnam, bombed to the ground.
Yes, devastated.
During my lifetime, now produces more coffee than Kenya, and is in one of the leading in the apparel industry in terms of stitching. Entire enlightened leadership. And in this regard, one must begin to interrogate this thing called democracy. You know, part of the African problem has been this democracy that is conceived in Washington, in Paris, in Brussels, in Madrid, in London. I think governance must also be informed by the realities on the ground. It is only then that it is sustainable, so that it addresses the issues that are unique to a particular country and the idiosyncratic factors that inform governance. Once you do that, then it will be possible to liberate Africa from the chains of sorrow and want. And I want to repeat ad nauseum that organizations such as yours and individuals such as yourselves, who are children of two worlds now, in a manner of speaking. You've been here for a reasonably long period with your comrades in arms, but you've never severed the umbilical cord with your home. What is it that we can learn that can inform our activities back at home? There is a Kenyan writer called Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Yes, I read him.
Yeah, Ngugi, in his book The River Between, has his chief character as a young man called Wayaki. And the Wayaki is a young villager, and he's sent to what is then called the white man's school. But he is warned. The warning is very specific. Go and learn the ways of the white man and bring it back home, but never abandon your cultural roots. And I think there is merit in that we've got to learn from other civilizations. Why is it that Europe and America at critical moments in their history achieve certain things? What is it that we can learn? What is it that the Indians are doing better than we can? What is it that the Chinese or the South Koreans or the Brazilians? So it is this melange of ideas that will then become the recipe for our own success, but garnished in a manner that is unique to our own circumstances. And we must do that as a matter of urgency. Because if we don't, then the young and restless will be enticed by other evil forces to the detriment of Africa. It's a luxury that we can ill afford.
Loud and clear.
Yes.
Loud and clear. Now, part of what you also said, I'm very, glad that you have made that commitment to visit every African head of state at some point within the next 3 years. I really commend you for doing that. Now, in that process, have you considered also influencing or speaking in support of very emerging political leaders or emerging political leadership that you think that will make this achievement of the crusade that you have started more easily achieved?
I have no doubt in my mind, and I think it's the Chinese who put it very well. They say just like waves push waves in the ocean, so must young leaders replace old ones. Part of the problem of Africa is that we have had leaders who are very reluctant to leave office. And I've always held the view, and I may be wrong on this, but I doubt, that if one is elected into the high office of the presidency beyond 10 years, then the law of diminishing returns begin to set in. And we have seen this. If you look at the history of, say, somebody like Robert Gabriel Mugabe of Zimbabwe, in the first 10 years he did a fantastic job. His decisions were good, they were clear, and the economy was thriving. If you looked at leaders who, people like Saserese Khama in Botswana who served for 10 years, the economy was good. If you look at somebody like Joaquim Chissano in Mozambique, the economy was growing at between 8 and 9%. In Namibia, Sam Nujoma. Yes. And so one is saying, without naming all the names, that there is a sense in which we must encourage our political leaders to realize that leadership of the political kind is a relay race, with one generation handing over the baton to another generation. And the true leadership, in fact, is that your success must be determined by the success of your successor. Nyerere used to say it very well, that you are not successful until your successor succeeds. And this is why I think, therefore, that we must energize universities, institutions of higher learning. We must energize all these sites, because if you are a lone crusader, your agenda becomes lonely and it cannot gain traction. So one of the things that I think we are doing, and we are doing this with the reasonable measure of success, is to recruit young men and women. I was very glad yesterday one of my mentees in Dar es Salaam sent me a clip saying, I learn from you and others learn from me. And I sent him a thumbs up saying, that is the way. Yes. There is no greater recompense for a teacher than to produce a pupil who surpasses him. So this deliberate effort right now, what we are trying to do is to create order and engaging people in an orderly manner. And once we engage them in an orderly manner, we are telling them, speak out, engage in commercial activities, but also make sure that 10% of your income goes into philanthropy. And I think there is a basketballer from the Democratic Republic of Congo who played here in the United States called Dikembe Mutombo. Yeah, Dikembe Mutombo has built one of the biggest hospitals in Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in his own unsophisticated way, he said something that was philosophical. He said, when God gives you the opportunity to use the elevator to go up, send the elevator down. Yes. So that it also brings others up. Yes. And I think that is what we are trying to do, to persuade leaders that true leadership is determined by how many people you mentor. Yes. I'm not a leader until I have mentees. Absolutely. How many of them? And leadership must not only be confined to the political arena. That is another mistake that most Africans make. I hear students being asked, what do you want? Everybody wants to be the president. There can only be one president. I want, in the local authority, you want good leaders in the local authority. You want good leaders in the public institutions, so that you have an army, so to speak, of leaders. And that service is the primary motivation. So in a nutshell, that is what we are trying to do, to energize all these sites, and it must be in rural. Africa is still very rural. Yes. You've got to go to rural areas. You've got to go to the poor urban areas and energize people and make them participate. And I love what the Americans do quite much more effectively than any other country in the world. Town hall meetings. Yes. These town hall meetings are critical because those are the sites of decision making. So the demand is from the bottom. Yes. There is accountability, so that we kill this thing which has killed Africa, where you have these demigods who think that they are God's gift to the world, and that, as Achebe used to say it very well, that we create leaders who think that they are God's gift to the world. They hold the knife and the yam, and depending on how effectively you praise them, they cut a little piece to them, and then you praise them even more. We must kill that kind of leadership, and everybody must know that yours is to serve, and once you serve, you leave it, and that you are doing this for this generation and generations yet to be born. And institutions. Why do countries such as the United States of America thrive? I know they have their own problems, but right now there is a sense in which institutions in a country such as the United States of America, or you go to countries in Europe such as Norway or Denmark or Sweden or Finland or any typical European country of the western part of Europe, they are institutions. Occasionally you have rogue leaders, but they discover to their chagrin that the institutions are capable of taming your rogue instincts, and your horns will also be cut. So institutions must be given their pride of place. Absolutely. And that is why, to me, education is also very important. What are we teaching our young men and women in the university? There is a book that I love, which I hope you've read, and if you have not, you'll read it. And if you read it, reread it again. Yeah. Carter G. Woodson's 1933 book, The Miseducation of the Negro. Carter G. Woodson was here in the United States of America in 1933, and he was asking the question, what are we teaching the African Americans who are then called Negroes? And he was saying that they are being miseducated. During the period, I think that was also the period he was learning from Booker Taliaferro, Washington, the Tuskegee College in Tennessee. Yeah. And they were interrogating, they were asking critical questions. We must now ask, what are we teaching our young men and women? Are we preparing them to serve effectively in the African environment? Because the Chinese are asking that question. The Chinese are sending their best men and women to universities in Western Europe. I mean, Chinese, we know how they got it, among other things. You learn, get a machine, reverse engineer, and you start with very rudimentary. You are an engineer, you know this better than I. That is what we must do, and it must happen in Nigeria, it must happen in Burkina Faso, it must happen everywhere, so that when Africa makes the claim that agriculture is the backbone of our economy, what is the value addition? It may be that we are not making these decisions and implementing them, but this is the time to do it. And the way to do it is to persuade the political class that they have a solemn duty to ensure that they conduct themselves in a manner that creates a crop of leaders. You know, many times I listen again to the inauguration speech of John F. Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I think it was during his administration that the Peace Corps movement was initiated. I do not know. I'm quite certain that books have been written about the impact of the Peace Corps movement in America as such. Some of the leading American diplomats served during their school days as Peace Corps in rural Africa and in other areas. So their knowledge of Africa is intimate.
Saturday, a few of them were there.
Correct. So what we must do is to sometimes just copy and paste. Yes. Copying and pasting is not a bad thing. No, it's not a crime. Yeah, it's not a crime if you do it in a creative manner. Yes. So in my view, as we go through Africa, we are going to talk more, we are going to shout from the rooftops, but beyond the shouting, I think we now must have to anchor some of these activities on the hard ground of practice so that we are not for too long on the drawing board. We make mistakes on the ground rather than having a perfect drawing, which will never see us on the drawing board, rather on the ground. So I think that is how we want to do it. Yeah. Mm.
Well,
yeah.
It's such a pleasure talking to you, Prof. There are so many other things that we would have loved to touch on, even our various ethnic biases. And
perhaps that is, but with 3 minutes remaining to our conclusion, I think perhaps that is the one thing that we must conclude with. Part of the African problem, if it is a problem at all, I think it is not a problem because it is something that is manipulated by the opportunistic politician, is ethnic diversity. Yes, I hold the view that the diversity in Africa is a strength. Kenya's Ali Mazurui, who was a leading scholar here in the United States of America, has written a book titled The Power of Babel. Not the tower, the power of Babel. And his argument is that this diversity, if it is harnessed, then it has the power of the piano with the black and white keys, which is played, produces melodious music. And I think that if we were to harness that going forward, we would be able to solve the problem that we have, because your typical politician manipulates this and makes ethnicities fight, as we see in Sudan, as we see in the Democratic Republic of Congo, see in Nigeria, and we see in Kenya and in Somalia and even at one time even in Zimbabwe. So going forward, it is we who have had the advantage of education who must in some way ensure that we inform the political class and by extension persuade our people that the tribe, as we call it, or ethnic extraction is innocent. We must celebrate our diversity, but let's use our strengths in a positive manner, in the manner that we have seen it being done in other countries. Switzerland is a good country, that is a good model that comes to mind. The Swiss, if you read her history, had these problems of ethnicity. Then a certain strong general came and said, we know there's German speaking, there is Italian speaking, there is Romanic speaking, and there is French speaking. We are going to create a country with our cantons. You are going to preserve your German culture, your Romance culture, your French culture, your Italian, but we are going to be one nation.
Yes, indeed.
And it can be done. Yes. And it must be done. Yes. Because if it is not done, we are done.
Ladies and gentlemen, there have been many more of this, and we really thank Professor PLO for being with us and sharing his time with us and visiting us all these days, and hopefully we'll be able to bring you back. It's a genuine pleasure.
Thank you.
To really have you. You have impacted many lives for the few days you've been here.
Thank you.
Later on today, we'll be at the City Hall, where the mayor of the city of Lowell has actually expressed great enthusiasm. The entire council have expressed great appreciation for you to be here, and they have requested that you be with them during the city council meeting today, for presentation of the key to the city and all that.
Thank you.
And also the state rep of the area, Radi Mom, has also invited you to State House sometime tomorrow. So we're going to try to put all those things in place before you catch your flight out of this place.
Thank you.
It is really a pleasure to have you.
Yeah.
And ladies and gentlemen, always remember the African Cultural Association. We're here to promote our African heritage and make your voices be heard. Get involved in any way you can. You can give us a call. Visit us on www.africanfestivallowell.org and contribute. Check us out on Facebook, African Festival Lowell, and make your contribution or make your comments, and we'll be very pleased to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. God bless you.
God bless you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
All set there?